Welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. In this series, we bring you sessions from the Emergency Services Show and the Emergency Tech Show 2025. In this episode, we're joined by two police chaplains who, together with Jenna Flanagan from Oscar Kilo, the Police Wellbeing Service, talk about how to look after police officers when the incident is over. Continuing the theme of learning from the summer 2024 riots, they share how chaplaincy and wellbeing are at the heart of recovery.
I'm delighted to introduce Reverend Matthew Hopley, Reverend John McCarthy, and Jenna Flanagan, who are going to talk to you this morning about welfare. But they're going to talk to us about what that means on the ground, at the incident, around the incident, and the aftermath as well. And also very much about Oscar Kilo and about how that helps with police officer welfare. I will let Matthew take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you all this morning. Just as a quick caveat and just following on for what's been said, I was with the policing minister 2 days ago, and she's brand new into post, and it was really interesting to hear her say very clearly from the outset about the well-being of our officers. She's also got responsibility to fire as well, and that was very much on her agenda really early on, that this is a priority for her as well. So the context for our session together this morning, we're going to tell a bit of a story. There'll be a bit of an interjection between the three of us as we go through it. But we recognise the story that we're talking about took on an operational name for us that was referred to as Op Navet. But at the heart of Op Navet were a number of precious souls who were deeply affected by some really tragic circumstances. And I think it's only right and proper that we start our session by acknowledging that. So on the 29th of July 2024, a themed dance and yoga workshop was held at Heart Space in Southport, where 26 children were in attendance. Merseyside Police received their first emergency call at 11:47 on that morning, and emergency services were dispatched. Sergeant Gillespie, Constable Holden, PCSE Parry were the first on scene. The attacker had killed 3 young girls and had seriously injured 8 more girls, 2 adults, who had tried to stop the rampage that had taken place inside of that venue. And it was a premeditated decision for him to go to that venue to do what he did. The officers swiftly confronted and detained him, preventing further harm. Their bravery, their decisive action in the face of the chaos were widely praised by the community and also by police leadership. Today we rightly remember 9-year-old Alice, 6-year-old Bibi, 7-year-old Elsa, along with the other 8 seriously injured girls and the other 2 adults who were wounded too. We also hold in appreciation each officer who was involved in the detention of the offender and those who attended the scene on the day. That's where we start, because that's where all of our involvement comes in, is how we then wrap around and we care for those people who were faced with a horrific set of circumstances. My role as National Chaplain very much came into a coordination role sat within our central National Police Chiefs Council team, but on the ground was John. So John leads the chaplaincy team in Merseyside, and what I'd love to do, John, is just get you to share a little bit about what happened in that first few hours of that story breaking for you, how you processed that, and what your initial thoughts were around what you needed to do to wrap around those officers and staff. Still in those golden hours, what was your train of thought around thinking? So over to you, John.
Yeah, when I was alerted to something going on, I immediately realised that this was going to be a serious matter, and police officers and staff around the force will undoubtedly need some support in the background. what you've got to bear in mind, our chaplains are volunteers, so they're all at home at this present moment in time, as was I, because it was my day off. But I immediately contacted them all to find out where they were and what their availability was going to be. Knowing the type, the other thing I must say, I was a police officer for 30 years, I was detective inspector, and I was involved in incidents such as this, not as serious as this, but I know how these incidents come down. So I knew that the chaplains wouldn't be best served at that moment in time going anywhere near the scene or trying to find out about these police officers. So my key focus then became who are the officers and staff attending, and where are they from around the force? Because it won't have just been police officers from Southport who attended that scene. I coordinated the chaplains then to attend briefings on the Tuesday morning, the morning after, because even those officers who affected the arrest and saw the aftermath of what had happened in Hart Street, they wouldn't have been contactable by us or anybody else. They were key to the investigation. Their support would have been given to them at that time by their own colleagues and supervisors. So Tuesday morning was the key incident. So I fortunately had 7 to 10 chaplains who were willing to go out and go to the briefings at 7 o'clock in the morning around the force at the areas where they knew police officers who had attended that scene and may well were affected by it actually were, and to offer our support and let them know about the other support that existed around the force.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that then? So we've all seen footage, and we will have seen outputs of court cases, so we will have an idea of what the scene may have looked like. But the reality of that was there was a whole, you've got officers attending, intervening, preserving life. You've then got members of the public, family of those children who were there turning up on scene. And then there's also that wider ripple effect of even our officers having to go out to families' home, telling families horrific news around their children, around the impact of what's gone on. So it's not just those who turned up on the scene. We've got people who took all those distressed 999 calls. We've got people who've been out to people's homes and have had to help parents come and identify their children. It's wider than just those who rock up on the day.
I can actually add to that, because police officers, for instance, if you know Merseyside, you've got Southport, which is on one side of the River Mersey, and we have the Wirral, which is a good distance away on the other side. None of those officers on the Wirral had anything to do with Southport. However, those officers know what policing is like. They put themselves in the shoes of the officers who attended the scene. They themselves were struggling with how they would cope in those circumstances.
Yeah.
So even people who weren't even part of it were affected by what went on.
And so that ripple effect of events does stretch far and wide within our emergency services organisations. It isn't just about those who attend on the scene. It's interesting because you've talked about being there, or your team being on deck the next morning and meeting those people. What's the purpose of your chaplains being in those briefings so early the next morning?
The purpose of the chaplains is just to bring a presence which includes their humanity. They bring their life experience, and that is there. But the other side of it is that they are members of the community, and it's a reflection to the police officers and police staff involved of the community's care for them and their want to care for them. And that's the whole reason why they are there, to be seen, to be a presence, and know that someone is there to support them and be there to hold them up when they need it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to mention really early on, for some of you who may not have had any involvement with emergency services chaplains, in that context of it's not the religious for the religious. Chaplains are motivated by their faith, but they're there for anybody. And the uniqueness of chaplaincy is they are vetted and embedded within the life of the force, which means so your team can just turn up, get in there, be around people and support them, which is a uniqueness around one of those operational moments where we can be very reactive and put people into spaces really quickly. I think it's also worth noting that when they're in those spaces, it's not about their faith. that might motivate them to be present, but they're listening ears. They're there to listen to people unravel a little bit about what they've seen, maybe the frustrations of stuff that went on the day.
Yeah.
And is that what you saw as well?
No, that is it. And the police officers and the staff know that what chaplains are, that are listening here, but that are listening here outside of the organisation. So in essence, they can say an awful lot to chaplains that they would never say to their colleagues, supervisors or anyone else in the police. But that is how they are seen by police officers and police staff. Those individuals who they can actually talk to in confidence, and those individuals won't have any judgment about what they've got to say about them.
I think as we look at how the story evolved over those next few days, it's really interesting that when we talked about this, some of your team had got vested interest in the local community. So they knew some of those connections, not necessarily the families, but the setting where those families were, the schools that those children were from, some of the other events and activities that take place. And it's a good point to acknowledge that chaplains are conduits between the emergency services. So in our case, within policing, they're conduits between the community and back into the emergency services. So they're a good point of contact, actually, when there is hostility or there are issues taking place. In those moments, the chaplains can help to bridge some of that communication gap. And when we've talked about this before, you talked about what started to unfold, where it went from turning up to a horrific scene. The situation started to shift over that next 24 hours. So internally within policing, we're not necessarily actively embedded inside of our command and control rooms to understand what the intelligence picture looks like, but we understand very quickly when something's shifting. So what was the first sign for you that something was shifting in that scenario?
Well, it wasn't until later on the Tuesday we had the vigil in Southport for the young girls and everyone else involved in that incident. But we were aware of people gathering elsewhere and all those different possibilities. Now, because I've got connections within the police and I know lots of police who know what I'm there for now, they would tell me certain things. So then we realised that there was going to be disorder. But again, a chaplain isn't any good being out where disorder is taking place. But it's for me, to coordinate our chaplains to be ready for the aftermath. And that aftermath came on the Wednesday morning after what we all must have seen on the Tuesday evening out in Southport.
Yeah, and I think it's also to acknowledge, Jenna, at this point, from the Oscar Kilo team, as we looked at the national wellbeing picture, we knew we needed to wrap around the officers and the staff in Merseyside who'd responded to the initial incident. And at this point, word came through very quickly around the level of injuries that were being sustained by our officers who were on the receiving end of the disorder. So do you want to give us a couple of examples of some of the things that Oscar Kilo sent out? I know the vehicles is probably a good starting point.
Yeah, so our role as a National Police Wellbeing Service is to provide that support to organisations at a national level, but also to provide the support into the sort of the gold command structure. So we initially got straight into the MPOC Gold Command structure, and from there we could then sort of mobilise whatever support we were able to give, not just in locally in Merseyside, but of course to the sort of the forces across the country that were being affected. The first thing we did was actually around the coordination of occupational health support. So actually helping and assisting the organisations to ensure that they had the capacity and resource to do what they needed to do. And as Matthew mentioned, the deployment of our outreach vehicles as well. So there was somewhere on the ground for officers and staff to seek some support, quiet space, whatever it is they needed from that vehicle, to make sure they had.
If I can bring you back in, John, at that point then. So that first, it wasn't a pocket of disorder. It was terrible disorder that happened on the streets.
Yeah.
And I think our officers who came off with some pretty horrific injuries on that first evening, can you just share a little bit of insight around what it was like back at the station? I know that you'd got people receiving officers back and there was a triage centre that kind of had to happen inside of the station. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot came after that Tuesday evening because there was officers recognised there was a great deal of not being prepared for what was going to happen. It was very difficult as a chaplain to stand and listen to people who would suggest that maybe they didn't think they were going home that night and that wouldn't be going just to a hospital to be treated. They'd end up in the morgue themselves because of the barrage of violence that erupted on top of them. So it was very difficult trying to get them to actually speak because most people were quite numb from what had happened. They were quite disillusioned with how things had been handled on the night. And that was not just those officers who were there, it's the officers around the force. Now, officers are trained for those situations and they're classed as Pol 2. So in essence, they talk about having their Pol 2 ticket. Lots of people started to think about handing them back because they are all volunteers.
So for those who might not know, that ticket means that they're trained to deal with public order, disorder.
Yeah.
They'll wear all the riot gear,
Yeah.
and they're trained to actually intervene with formal tactics.
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was just that disillusionment, the fear factor of everything that they've been dealing with, and wondering whether it was worth it, really, because, as I say, some of them thought they wouldn't have gone home that night.
I know from speaking to some of the senior officers who were involved with the incident that on the day of the tragic circumstances, there were officers who did scene guard, they attended the scene, but then here they are a couple of days later or 24 plus hours later in their gear out in riot scenario. What a pendulum of emotions of turning up and seeing the most horrific stuff to then being on the receiving end of violence.
It's a difficult thing, I think, for lots of police officers, because I know quite a number involved in the incident in Southport were given the opportunity to take the following days off, but they didn't want to. They wanted to be there to support their other colleagues now who are suffering from the disorder and do their part and play their part in those incidents. So yeah, they were thrown out there. I mean, the police forces are generally under-resourced in these areas, so they know what they need to do and just to support their colleagues.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the Emergency Services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
Before we move on to talk about what happened nationally, I just want to draw out from you something that you'd shared with me before around inside the station, where it was all kicking off outside. There was officers who'd retreated into the station, and you'd got chaplains inside of the station. There was a medical triage kind of taking place. Tell me a little bit about what the chaplains were involved with on that evening.
Well, on the day when that was happening, they were just basically sitting with injured officers. They're not first aiders, but they can actually sit with them, make sure that they were okay. They were talking to the staff who were around. But one of the big things that stood out for me, and this is a member of a police officer who stopped me later on, to say that, well, basically they said I could have cried because I looked out the window and there are chaplains, members of our community, going around looking after and supporting my colleagues outside. He said, that's what chaplaincy is all about, and that's why we're happy that you're here, because it actually makes us believe that there are people outside who do actually believe in the police service.
Yeah. And it's precious to acknowledge that there are 500 chaplains in policing. Vast majority of those are volunteers, representative of various faiths from different cultures, ages and ethnicities as well. So it is a multi-faith provision across policing. There was one precious story that you'd shared with me. One of your chaplains ended up holding a drip bag because of literally it was everybody just did something to contribute in those moments.
Yeah, lots of police officers were, the drip baggers, lots of police officers were dehydrated. The amount of equipment they've got to wear is quite a lot, and most of them were falling over, dehydrated with heat exhaustion. So yeah.
Precious stuff. So what happened nationally then is you've already made reference to the NPOC team, Jenna. So I sit within the National Police Chiefs Council, which houses NPOC. That team are the team who organise and coordinate a national response for times such as disorder. Our gold team was stood up very quickly. We did 18 days straight as the story started to evolve very quickly. The intelligence picture became quite clear that what we'd seen happen on the doorstep in Southport wasn't going to be limited there. And we saw pockets of not just intelligence, but the outcome of that intelligence turned to disorder. So for me, sat centrally, I was sat in the hub watching us having to look at how we were going to mobilise troops. So I'd got our lead chaplains gathered and explaining to our lead chaplains from across the 43 plus forces, you might not have intelligence that there's going to be disorder on your patch, but two things are going to happen that you need to know about. There are offenders travelling from your patch to go and commit offences. And secondly, we are sending carriers from your force. So local to here is a good example, Warwickshire Police. They were sending carriers right across the UK to go and send people out to go and support with disturbances. But we hadn't got offences taking place on that local force patch. So enabling our chaplains to be there to kind of wish them well as they were heading off and also to receive them as they were returning, that was part of our strategy. And then also knowing that we'd got officers going out into the communities and making dynamic arrests. We saw the accelerated judicial process around how the government made some decisions around we were going to arrest and we were going to prosecute very quickly. So we saw all of those things happening. The Oscar Kilo team did a fabulous job of getting the vans out, getting appropriate resources to go out to where we knew we'd got areas where there'd been significant disorder and how we were going to wrap around doing the immediate care for those people. But they're being really open, we saw early on there were going to be points of learning for us really, really quickly. And where we've done exercises in the past, maybe we've written policies, procedures and guidance, what we could tell there was a shift that needed to happen of how we prepared people for what was evolving there and then, but also capturing that learning to make sure we were preparing our people for the future. And I think that really neatly leads us to talking around what's triggered the Oscar Kilo team, the National Wellbeing team in partnership with the college and the NPCC. What happened from in the midst of the disorder? You guys were picking up this learning. What have you done with that learning?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're here to do is to try and make lives easier for people in forces. We try and do everything we can, all evidence-based, to provide forces with resources and guidance and tools and things they can use to take some of that pressure away. So, you know, you've got to find when a major incident like this is presented, you know, you've got to find that balance between your civil contingencies, your health and safety legislation, all the stuff you have to do from a legal perspective, and you have to balance that immediately with the welfare of your own officers and staff. Obviously, it's a busy time. You've got the operational type, you know, that takes over. That's, of course, is the response takes over. So as a result of the learnings from Nvet, we updated our major incident guidance, which it's a really comprehensive document in and of itself that was published in 2020 and was mobilised initially during COVID-19. But as a result of Nvet and the HMI report, that has been updated, which now provides your gold, silver and bronze command structures with essentially a go bag. So the minute that incident is upon you, your command structure have the three versions of what they need to do in front of them, which splits out in a really tactical and practical way your role clarity for each of your three command structures, and then the priority actions that fall out of it. They're really brief, they're really concise, and it's all about being able to implement that initial response to make sure that wellbeing and welfare isn't an add-on, it isn't secondary, it's part of your overall response. And so what we've tried to do is make that more accessible. So we're doing lots of things to get that into forces and get it in front of people. But you can, if you're interested, actually download it from the Oscar Kilo website. If you've got a police login, anybody in policing can go and see what that document looks like. And I think it feeds into the broader piece around the major incident guidance as it is, which is around preparedness. It's around not only picking this up and looking at it when the major incident's upon you, it's about us trying to get people to bring this into their preparedness, into their planning, into their, whether it's hydrant, whatever it is, getting it in early so that when those incidents do land, you know what to do.
Yeah, and let's be really clear, that learning isn't based on criticism of the dynamic decisions that any of the emergency response teams have to make in those moments. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And when we sit and we do that, you might call it reflective practice or whatever the buzzword is within your respective organisations. When we reflect on these incidents, we're not looking to trip people up and say, well, you did this wrong. The dynamic decisions that people made on the day, they made those decisions because it was the right thing that they felt was proportionate and to do at the time. When we move out of those critical moments, the golden hours have passed by and we've got an opportunity to reflect on those things. That's when we start to build, I guess, a guidance that prepares us for the future. Is there a couple of nuggets that you can share with us from that guidance that have been a bit of a shift to maybe what was in place before?
Yeah, I think really it's the practical element of it, which is the grab and go element. In addition, it's not just about responding to the incident as and when it lands, it's about the during and the after. It's also about considering all the various aspects that you need to think about. So you've got obviously your initial frontline responders, but like you said before, Matthew, there are numerous other roles who are involved in that initial response, whether they're call handlers, whether they're your press officers, whether, whatever role it is, your HR, your OH staff. There's a whole myriad of roles and responsibilities that mustn't get forgotten. And actually, there are some really, really good areas of practice. Some forces are absolutely outstanding at this. And so again, it's about learning. It's about being able to share best practice from what works. And that's what we're trying to do, with the guidance, provide something tactical, but also provide a sort of a starting point for future development. It's not going to stay static as it is. It'll always, it can be updated, as we've shown with this, recently. It's not just going to sit collecting dust on a shelf. This is about something that's actionable. Yeah. That people can use on the ground.
For those who sat in the audience or listening on the podcast on the catch-up, can you just explain the positioning of Oscar Kilo, formal name being the National Police Wellbeing Service? Can you just explain the position of that and how that interacts with local forces?
Yeah, so Oscar Kilo is just the sort of the brand and the name for the National Police Wellbeing Service. That's centrally funded through the Home Office, and we sit in the College of Policing as our sort of legal entity, as our body. And what we're here to do is to provide support and guidance for forces to ensure they are legally and morally compliant, essentially, when it comes to welfare and wellbeing. There are 43 forces in England and Wales. There are 43 different ways of doing things. But what we're here to do is try and provide some consistency, some evidence-based, some best practice sharing, some learning, so that actually forces don't necessarily need to do things 43 different ways. That, there is something here from a national perspective where we've brought everything together to enable them to be more efficient, essentially, in their welfare and wellbeing response.
If somebody who's listening is involved with policing, how can they access this guidance?
So the Oscar Kilo website is oscarkilo.org.uk. The majority of information and resources on the site are open access, so you can go and have a look. And there is a lot on there when you get there. There's a lot there. But there's certain specific guidance, like the major incident guidance. We've also got a national health and wellbeing strategy, workforce prioritisation guidance. All of those organisational resources are, if you work in policing, if you've got a police.uk email address, you can log in and access all of those documents. They aren't just being kept to specific roles. This is about enabling everybody who works in policing, whatever your role, to sort of take ownership and understand what support should be on offer to you. and actually, if we can, try and drive a little bit of action from the ground up as well, because I think the conversation you're having here about the individuals and the work that you've done, you're connecting on a one-to-one basis with people. That's what it's all about. Yeah. And it's about making sure that those individuals on that day, when they need it, whether it's as a result of a major incident or otherwise, just part of your day job, the point is that we keep those people in mind through everything that we're doing.
Absolutely. So may I encourage you, for those who are outside of policing, the Oscar Kilo website has got a whole heap of resources on there. So please do take the opportunity to go onto the website, look at those resources, be inspired, and maybe take some of what you've seen on there and share that back into the various organisations that you represent. And the team at Oscar Kilo have started to do more work with other organisations, sharing learning practices, because ultimately in the midst of this, anybody who's involved with emergency services, they are dedicated people who have chosen to dedicate their life and their service to serving the public. And we all got a bit of a duty of care that stretches across all of those. So please do feel free to look at those resources that are on there. I think as we come to the latter part of our presentation, I'll come to you, Jenna, first. As you look back to those critical weeks from the tragic incident and then what subsequently happened in the weeks directly after with the disturbances, for you and for your team and who you were directly involved with, what's one or two things that you look back with a real sense of pride that your team achieved X, Y, or Z?
I think the fact that we were able to get straight into the gold command structure was the first thing, because there's so much going on that actually you need that central point so that everyone knows where to go to and what's available and how we can help. And I think the fact that we're in a position now, so the National Police Wellbeing Service has existed for a number of years. It's only recently that we are now in that really robust position where we are at the table. We've always been there sort of strategically in conversation, but operationally now we're there, and I think that's been one of the real key drivers, alongside other developments in terms of broader strategy and ensuring that forces are fit for purpose, fit for the future, fit to respond to things like that. We are now in a much stronger position to support with that.
Thank you. And I would echo some of what you've just said from my national role, the fact that from the first gold that was called, it's the first time the national chaplain's ever been put in to those gold meetings to see, if you like, the air traffic control of what's going on, hearing all the agencies, hearing the updates from the Home Office. It was fascinating for me to hear that, but then to be able to take those portions of information and cascade that down to our lead chaplains and in turn who can motivate their volunteers to be around. That was a really poignant learning point for me as well. So yeah, I echo that. And rightly so, John. I think we kind of wrap up our session coming back to you and your team and our appreciation to those. It wasn't just chaplains. There was many other people within your force who stood up and did some incredible wellbeing care. The Oscar Kilo vans came out. They were also manned by other local forces who were a part of that. But as you look back to your team of chaplains, what's one or two things that you were particularly, you have a sense of pride about what they did?
As I said when I started, all chaplains are volunteers. They got their home families. They got their own lives that they lead. Some of them actually work. But they were willing to give all that up and come and spend time looking after police officers. As the lead chaplain, it's my job to look after their welfare. So on the Saturday of the disturbances in Liverpool city centre and further out in the outskirts of Liverpool, I had a number of chaplains who spent from 12 o'clock in the afternoon till 1 o'clock in the morning looking after police officers as they were coming backwards and going backwards and forwards from the different disorders that were taking place. That was despite the fact that I took one of them home because I didn't want them staying out there because I had to look after their welfare, but they just come back. They just come back, and it's that want by the community, the people of the community who chaplains are, to come back and serve their police officers and police staff.
We're going to create an opportunity now for some questions, and where we can, we'll respond to those too. But I wonder if you'd show your appreciation to John and to Jenna for all the things that they've been involved with and the things that they've managed to instigate. If you'd like to maybe do that through applause.
Thank you.
Over to the floor. So if you've maybe got a question or something that you'd like to share, we led through this.
My name is Alec Western and I'm from OBIS. With regard to the wonderful work that you clearly do when some of these horrific things happen, what about the long-term support? Because sometimes when people reflect back, they don't always see the effect it's had on them, but it starts coming out a long time afterwards. So what is your support for them then, please?
Yeah, absolutely. If I do the first response to that, and then maybe Jenna, if you pick up the second bit, I think it's really important to acknowledge that if we're going to refer to it as PTSD, or if you're going to call it scars that are visible and non-visible, however we label this, sometimes it can be many years down the line when things come back and really haunt you with what you've seen and what you've experienced. Wellbeing in policing will never be a one-size-fits-all. It will always be a smorgasbord. It will always be a buffet. Some people will come to chaplaincy. Some people will choose to speak to a counsellor. Some people will pick up a 24-hour helpline. There's a whole mix. And I think it's important that we make sure that there's a buffet of wellbeing provision that's available. But as long as there's synergy across all of those, and then where there are those opportunities where people want to tap into that through a confidential resource, let's make sure they can do that. If they want to do it through their line manager, so there's some accountability, let's make sure that those avenues are available to them as well. So they're already in place across all of our police forces, but strategically there are other partnerships that Oscar Skilo have fostered as well.
Yeah, so we have, I briefly mentioned it before, sort of a national health and wellbeing strategy, which talks about your provision as a whole. So we've been talking about major incidents specifically here, but what our national health and wellbeing strategy does is talks about what should be available 24/7, 365 days a year, because we know exactly that. We know that these things don't often present immediately, and whether that's in response to a major incident, whether it's just a difficult job, whatever it can be, these things don't always present the same for everybody. I think one of the other issues as well with the major incident aspect is that in the job, that's what you're there to do, like that's the bit. So actually when you're in the major incident and you're in that sort of response phase, you're there, you're almost thriving on it. It's the bit when it goes quiet afterwards. And I think that's what does form very specifically part of that major incident guidance, is making sure that everything is phased and that you have specific activities against each of those phases to ensure that that support is available and accessible when people need it.
That's really helpful. And the follow-up to that then is, as chaplains, occupational health teams and so on, when somebody presents to us in some way, shape or form, it may well be that it's not in our gifting. So we're not in place as counsellors, but we become an on-ramp to build that trust and confidence to say, actually, we think you could do with counselling. Would you be willing for us to refer you? So part of our role is to be trusted, be a part of the organisation, and to be an on-ramp for that extra care as well.
Mark, I am a trustee of Basics Northwest, and in fact I know some of the people who actually responded to the incident itself and the aftermath. Just carrying on from what the gentleman was saying about the long-term care, one of the many hats that I wear, I'm a volunteer role player with Cheshire Fire and Rescue Service, and they have, on the volunteer side of it, they either just set up within the last few weeks or about to set up what you might call a therapy dog team. Now, not being disrespectful to John or to Matthew, there are some people who don't want to talk to chaplains, but they will talk to a dog.
Right, so you're
there
on, Jenna. No, you won't.
No,
Where's Poppy?
So the idea is you can book a slot with a dog and his handler, and they can basically talk to the dog, and the guy say, "Look, I think you need help, and this is how."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, and you touched on it before, Matthew, is having that myriad of options available to people, because absolutely, there is no one size fits all. People respond differently. The dogs are of huge benefit. As are our wellbeing outreach service, sort of the vans actually as well. I've got sort of anecdotal stories of people turning up to where there's a dog or a van and stood arms folded, uniform on, going, "A dog, really?" And you go, "Oh, go on then. Why do you think that?" Conversation starts. "Well, how's the dog going to help me?" "Well, help you with what?" the conversation goes on, and we've had 2 or 3 occasions where that conversation has resulted in an occupational health referral or, a physical health check, or they are conversation starters. They are a way of breaking down stigma. Not everybody likes dogs either. So that's another thing. But no, absolutely, you're right. It's about having a suite of options, if you will, that people can pick and choose from themselves.
So if you don't know, Oscar Kilo have got Oscar Kilo 9. So we've got wellbeing dogs right across the country. I think, have we got a dog already?
Yeah, Poppy's here. In fact, I think we've got 5 or 6 joining us.
So we've got Oscar Kilo dogs. We've got an accreditation process through Oscar Kilo that is now supporting other emergency services as well. So it's very much part of our offering that's in place.
Yeah, I'm Ken from Norway, Oslo. Just trying to paint a picture. What is a chaplain? Is that somebody who doesn't work with the police or emergency service? And why do you have a colleague group that if you have an incident, you can speak to a colleague, not to a person that don't work with the service?
Absolutely. So as a very quick wrap up to the session, chaplains are people who are deeply rooted in their respective faith, whatever that might be. They are relational, pastorally gifted, and they've passed police vetting and an interview process to come into policing. So there's a whole process to be a chaplain, but they will care for anybody, whether they have a faith or belief. They're there to wrap around and care for anyone. For us in UK policing, the vast majority of our chaplains are volunteers, and each force on the gold standards should have an employed lead chaplain who is there to coordinate chaplaincy to make sure it's embedded within each of the forces.
Right, thank you everyone.
Thanks for listening. Remember that by taking time to learn from our speakers, you can earn CPD points from our partner CPD.me. So do check out the link in the show notes. Our thanks to MSA Safety for their continued support for our podcast, and Smart Digital for producing this series. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.